like vodka for pronunciation.
Yeah. Voska.
All right. Well,
Voska. Are you Russian?
Okay.
So, okay, I'm Bob. Maria, we're here live from sunny New Hampshire on the Horne Show with our special guest, Sarah Voska, as in vodka. Sarah is with the Care About Climate organization, and she's in charge of the Education Academy, ClimAcademy. How about if we take a few minutes, Sarah, and tell us, you can tell us where you're from, a little bit about your organization, some highlights, and then we'll take it from there.
Sure. So, hi everyone, and hi Bob and Maria. My name's Sarah Voska, and like you said, I work with Care About Climate as the director of ClimAcademy. ClimAcademy is our climate change education program that we just relaunched this past Earth Day as a online classroom. Previously, we had a more informal education setting, and now we finally have all of our education materials uploaded into an online class that youth activists can go through and learn from other people from around the world that are in their cohorts about how to what the climate science is, how it relates to the economy, and what we can do to shape our economy for a sustainable future. The third course talks about developing their activism skills. And then the fourth course will be after they complete a project in their own communities. And it's called Assessing Success, where they'll come back and take a hard look at what worked and what didn't work, and how can they replicate this model. So we're really excited for this new year of climate education for us. So Care About Climate is based in the United States, but we are an international organization. Our mission is to educate, empower, and unite people around the world to advocate for more effective climate change solutions. And so we've got a number of different programs, one of which you may have seen before is the climate sign. So you hold up a C with your hand, or there's a symbol which looks like this. And so, we've seen with a lot of other international and national mobilizations, we've seen the peace sign or the raised fist for different movements, the equal sign for LGBT rights. And each of these symbols has so much power in creating a conversation and a dialogue and in unifying people around a conversation. And so we have the climate sign to unite people for climate action. So that was one of our first programs that we started. And now we have 5 programs that run the gamut from UN and policy engagement to youth and women's and gender empowerment, as well as our Climate Ambassadors program, which is our newest program. And that one takes the graduates from ClimAcademy from my program and then provides one-on-one mentorship as they go out into the world to launch their project. So we're super excited as we've been growing. Oh, and did I mention I'm from Chicago and I am 24 years old.
Okay.
That was the other.
So how long does the ClimAcademy usually last, from start to finish, to go through?
Sure. Each course takes 2 months. So we have 4 modules in each course, and they take about 2 weeks each. So you'll go in with a group of international students, so you get to hear a lot of really different perspectives in the discussion forums and in some of the different more interactive pieces of the homework. And as you can graduate and move on to the next course. So there's a series. You'll take 3 courses, go off to climate ambassadors and launch your project, and then you can come back to ClimAcademy and have that reflection period in our 4th course.
Okay, so do you start a new course every 2 months, or you take a break, or is it just once a year, or what's the schedule?
So far, it's been every 2 months we're launching a new course. So we launched our first course with this new format in April on Earth Day on April 22nd. And then 2 months later in July, we launched our second course. And then we're looking forward to, in September, launching our third course.
Okay, and is there a limit of how many people can sign up and go through the course? Or because it's online?
Right, so we're trying to keep the courses somewhat small, so 20 to 30 people in each cohort, just so that people get a chance to really engage and hear from other people, and so that our teachers aren't overwhelmed, because they are providing individual feedback to each of the participants. We call them climate envoys instead of students, because after they become an envoy, they then go on to be an ambassador. And so thinking in the diplomatic language, an envoy is someone who's sent ahead of an ambassador to kind of research information and learn and sometimes speak on their behalf. And so our envoys, we send out into their communities to do some of the background research that will help them put together a project.
Okay, you said you are international around the globe. Do you have language barriers, and how do you deal with that? Because I know, I'm here in the U.S. and I don't know very many languages, but when I start talking to people from Bangladesh or Africa, sometimes
They don't
there's a little
understand him.
either I'm talking too fast, I'm talking too slow, or I just they accent differently and I get different meanings. So how do you deal with that?
So that's one of the things that we've been really striving to advance on within ClimAcademy, within Care About Climate as a whole. So Empoder Clima is now available in 4 languages. They have all of their content in English, Spanish, Portuguese, and now French is the latest language that they just added this year, which is incredible. And so ClimAcademy is aspiring to be as multilingual as them. Right now, all of our content is only available in English. Everything, all the videos will have subtitles, so you can follow along, and a lot of it is reading along at your own pace. So, and we have a really big glossary of terms, so that even if English is a second or third or fourth language for some people, as I've seen through the program, they still have an opportunity to learn and be brought step by step through the process. We do aspire, though, to add languages, and so I think we might add Arabic in a couple years once we get all the courses through and everything's flowing well. French would definitely be another language that we're looking to add, and then going off from there to kind of the world languages, so that we can make it accessible for people. The course is free.
The course,
Anything from our
the course is free. Okay.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Now,
because
of
we
course,
want this course to
as you
be
progress and
needed.
you have graduates, of course, I guess you can utilize them to help with the language translation and help people through the course if they're not familiar with English too.
Mm-hmm, absolutely, yeah. One nice thing about this course is that it prepares people to go on to be Care About Climate volunteers if they want. So, or launch new programs or projects in their own communities. So, it's a really nice tool for us internally, as well as just building up climate education worldwide.
And is there any age discrimination going on in there? You limit the ages so everybody, you don't, or any age goes.
So we which range from 18 to 35, so that's our core target audience. We had
I said,
16-year-olds that go through the project, through the courses, though, schoolers, and they are just so motivated. And this past year with Greta and the Fridays for Future movement, and Jamie with the 0 Hour movement, over the past 2 years, we've seen this huge mobilization of high school students who are really wanting to act quickly and get engaged politically for their future, because they're seeing this climate crisis as something that's going to affect their lives and livelihoods by the time they're adults.
so
If not now.
Go ahead.
I'm sorry?
I was wondering, is there a disparity or lack of participation or more, what do I want to say? The U.S. less enthusiastic than
I'm sorry.
other,
My heart is breathing.
the what?
I think her audio is breaking. Okay, try again.
Okay. Better now? Or is it just whenever? I think we're crackling here. Can you hear me now? No? You muted again?
No, you're not.
Okay.
Yeah, she can hear you. She can.
Can you hear me?
It's still crackling a little.
Yeah.
Yes.
Both of us are crackling. I'm just saying, do you notice that people are more enthusiastic in Europe and the other countries so than in the U.S.? Are you moving room to room? I guess we're having some technical difficulties here.
Mm.
I'm not sure if it's on our end or the other end. Main Street, we'll change that to that one. Can you hear us better now? Or are you blocked off? Did we lose you? I'm still signed in. One more. We have one
She's still
low.
there.
We have one
She's
low.
there. She's there.
She's there, but she's not.
I think she's.
Mm-hmm. Can you hear me at all?
Are you better now? Can you hear us? No.
Sarah, can you hear us?
Are you not?
Are you here there? Feedback.
Well, I don't.
We're having a problem here. Oh well. Are you there?
What we can do is we can.
Yes.
Okay.
I'm here.
Now you're here?
Yes.
Okay.
Now it's better. Sorry.
It's okay. I don't know if you got the other question, last question, so it's more about I've noticed in my travels that people are more enthusiastic in other countries, especially the young adults, than in the U.S. Is that true, or am I in a bubble?
Well, that's tough. I think a lot of cultural factors play into whether U.S. or international youth feel like they have a stake to play in the climate change movement. And I think that's kind of shifting in the U.S. I think more people are realizing that the power dynamics that currently exist in the U.S. can perhaps be changed, and that there is hope for a more sustainable future in the U.S. Whereas, I remember in college about whether or not climate change was good for the environment, and whether humans had an intrinsic right or necessity to exploit the earth as
Is that us or her?
No, that's her.
That's her. Her
Yeah.
Chicago internet is not working properly.
Yeah. I think I understand. Fuck.
I think
It's just
it is the Windy City. I've only been to Chicago once, and that was at the airport, and even that time it was windy.
Oh, the airport Wi-Fi is the worst.
Well, that's because there's no trees and big buildings closing the airport off. So,
All right, hopefully you can hear me now.
so you think there was a time when people thought okay to use and abuse the environment? Is that what you're saying?
That, what was that, 2013, 2014? In a college class, we had a debate on whether or not humans had a right to exploit the environment or if we had a steward it. And it was myself and I think one classmate that believed we need to steward it, and everyone else said no, it's up for
It's
grabs.
as far as
So
for
that was
use
kind
and
of
take
a
advantage.
station needed to help people to understand why, the value that ecosystem services have, the value of conservation and preservation and mitigation and adaptation to climate change.
Right. Okay. So,
Is so
but that leads
important to maintain the life of the customer.
that leads me to ask: is it the people that you were dealing with in college that thought that it was the land and the environment was ours to use? Have they changed, or is it because a new population is coming and they're the ones that care more about it and think they have a right or they have an obligation to care for it rather than use it for economic prosperity and gain?
I think it's a little, I think some of the sustainability solutions that we've seen, like clean energy, have become more economically viable. And so people are seeing those as something that could be a solution that could fit into the current economic models that they're familiar with. And it makes financial sense. And so having things that are good for the environment and make financial sense, it's hard to negate that is the right way to. And so when we see more of those types of movements, I think a lot more of the general public gets on board. That being said, there's also this new generation of youth who have seen, they lived through the 2008 financial crisis as young children, and so they've entered into their teenage years, their most formative years of opinionating on things in a time of real division and crisis. And they've taken that opportunity to really make decisions on their own and form their own opinions that are not really dependent on what their parents believed. Whereas I think, even just, 10 years earlier, my generation, most of my peers, I think, still relied really heavily on their parents' political beliefs and ethics and morals to decide what they think is important. So I'm really inspired by this new generation of youth who are coming up and taking charge of their own opinions and thought processes and doing a lot of research to learn what sort of ideas and solutions to support to create a more just world.
Okay, so are you also involved in engaging the private industry, middle-aged people, or do you focus mostly on the youth and young adults?
My work mostly focused on youth, but obviously we have to talk to decision makers and policy makers to be able to try and convince them that we're not just talking the talk. We want them to walk the walk with us and implement these solutions on whether on a municipal level or on international level at the UN climate talks. As well, in my professional life, I work with nature-based solutions. I work as a salesperson for a company that sells prairies and wetlands, if you can believe it. It's kind of a dream job. I love it. I get to just kind of during the days, but it means that when I talk to my clients, they're, landowners, building managers or owners, facilitators for corporations, um, investment firms that are held to a requirement by the municipality in most cases or the county to have a certain degree of stormwater management. And so, most of the time we're looking at like a detention pond or wetland that has been required by the municipality to be planted with native plants. And they go, oh, why do I have to do this? It seems like a lot of money. Does it really do anything? These just look like weeds. And I have the incredible opportunity to talk to them about the benefits of these nature-based solutions that are provided by native plants. So I live in the midst of the United States, so we have great plants in the tall grass prairie ecosystem. So it's a really unique ecosystem, and in our wetlands and on the upland areas, the plants that are native to here have really deep root systems that can prevent soil erosion, promote groundwater infiltration, so that the rain, when it comes down, it doesn't just wash off like the pavement, but it really seeps down deep into the aquifers, so that when we source our drinking water from these shallow water aquifers, it is rejuvenated by these prairie ecosystems. Mm-hmm. And so by talking about the different solutions and come from investing in native landscaping, I get to talk all about carbon sequestration by the biomass in the root systems and in these ecosystems, as well as educating people about the environmental impacts and the value of nature. And so that's kind of how I get through to the middle-aged or older populations that don't necessarily see nature or climate as an issue in their day-to-day lives.
Right.
Mm. And I want to ask a follow-up question about that, which is, because you've been working selling prairies and but do you think that as a whole, the United, can you hear me? Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Okay.
I can understand you.
No, right. So I'm asking, I think as a whole, people in the United States take climate change serious. And I'm not just talking about like young people, but everyone in general, from politicians to like your neighbor down to the local community.
There's change. Sort of change going on with that.
Yes. So there's been a study by Yale climate.
Yeah, go ahead.
So Yale University has done a study on the political will in the United States to address climate change, and they have seen first of all, consistently people have an increase year over year of people who believe that global warming is happening, that it's human caused, and that it will harm people in the U.S. and in developing countries and them personally in the near to immediate future. So there, and I think it's like, I'm trying to pull up the statistics here, here, but I think it's like 70% of Americans who believe it. Oh. And so there's really overwhelming public support for adapting to climate change and for politicians to act on climate. But that's at the public level, not necessarily at the level of people who are really influencing and making the decisions, unfortunately. Mm-hmm. Represent Us is a great organization that has done some studies on, what bills go into law that reach the U.S. House of Representatives and Senate. And oftentimes it's not necessarily dependent on what individuals or America as a whole believes. So even if there's 99% agreement with a proposal, that doesn't mean that it will necessarily go into law. So even though we have a representative democracy, it doesn't always represent the true will of the American people. It's often decided by elite groups, by political lobbyists who are able to in large amounts of money. Unfortunately, that means that youth who may not be financially empowered as some of these decision-making groups and these lobbying groups have to work a lot harder to get a bill through. And so that's where we have to do some of the more public activism, some of the storytelling and protesting, and really getting out in the streets and talking to people about the urgency of action on climate change. But overwhelmingly, the American people do believe that we need to act on climate change now.
And I guess a big reason why it's harder here to motivate people and have them get out and do what needs to be done is that it's more expensive to live in this country and everybody has to work. They don't have a lot of spare time to go out and do all this stuff as volunteers.
Americans are. Oh. I'm sorry, could you repeat that?
It's okay. It's not. I was just gonna say it's probably. What did I say? I said
because it's expensive working here.
I said I think it's harder to motivate people here in the U.S. because it's more expensive here than a lot of countries, and people have to work. It takes up a lot of time. They don't have time to volunteer, and I guess in other countries, they're all looking for a little bit of support to get their volunteer stuff done. And I guess the other thing I want to mention is that I feel that it's probably hard to get through to the public officials for the reasons you say. Of course, that's proved by our rural and the Green Deal and all our objectives out of government because the lobbyists are lobbying for big corporations. But I guess they don't realize if they don't do something about the environment now, there won't be anybody around to make money off of in the near future. You know, if you don't plan.
And one thing that is going to make the COVID is that we've seen a huge shift in wealth towards these mega corporations, towards the ultra wealthy are gaining money while the average American is losing out. And so I think this is something that we've seen in the past with shock doctrine politics and trickle down economics we've heard of before in other instances of national or international crises. And so we need to be ultra vigilant in just making sure that we don't that we in fact seize the opportunity of COVID and this, partial paralyzation of the United States and global economy to reinvent it and move towards a more just transition, a sustainable future that we've always envisioned. Because we've seen that sustainable companies are more resilient. If you look at the S&P 500 or the Dow Jones or the NASDAQ, sustainable companies tend to do more, they tend to be more stable in their stock prices over time than particularly fossil fuel industries, which are really dependent on the supply and demand. They have fluctuating, and they're fluctuating a lot, and the regulations that they're subject to put them at high risk of losing money down the road. And so kind of taking this opportunity to divest from the companies that are causing global harm through their carbon emissions, that's something that we can take grasp of right now in the middle of COVID and really push forward to create a better future.
Right. It was definitely good to hear that the carbon emissions had gone down and the air quality in LA and San Francisco and all the big cities had gotten better with COVID because nobody out there, using all the gas and using all the factories or whatever, polluting the air. So, I mean, that was the one good thing, but of course, COVID is definitely not good. So. You have a question?
Yeah, I do.
Well,
So
I put my thoughts together.
okay, so Sarah, I
We need to make sure that
active in
that's
the
important.
conference of youth that took place last year, and I just wanted you to tell us a little bit how you got involved, why, and some of the experiences, like the experiences you had working on organizing it, and like the challenges, because I know what you did organizing job and probably stressful as
Oh
well.
no.
Maybe you could tell us a little bit more about it and your experience.
Sure. So 2019, the UN climate talks were supposed to be hosted by Brazil, is what we were told. And then in January, the Brazilian president Jair Bolsonaro decided that this was not something that he or his administration would support. And so instead of the 25th anniversary of the UN climate talks being held in Rio de Janeiro, where it all started with the Rio Earth Summit in I think 1992, it had to go somewhere else, and so there was a brief period of total confusion where no one knew where the COP or the Conference of the Parties to the United Nations Convention on Climate Change would be held. And then all of a sudden Chile popped up and they said, we're in, we want to host the UN climate talks. And I was thrilled because I was excited to go to Brazil originally. I thought that would be a really neat place to go, and I speak a little bit of Portuguese, so I tried to practice that. I studied abroad in Chile when I was in college, and it was such an eye-opening experience, and Chile taught me so much about political movements and public participation, because while I was there, they were having these huge student mobilizations, unlike anything the U.S. has ever seen. I mean, we had thousands of Chilean students in the streets, marching for quality education and affordable education. And this was at the college and university level. So I was so impressed by how they were organized and how they infiltrated Congress by promoting their senior leadership and electing them into the House of Representatives there in Chile. And so I was so excited to go back and be part of the Chilean work on climate change activism. And it ended up being held in Spain in November of 2019. Mm-hmm. So during the whole period from January till it got moved, I was working with a group of Chilean youth, university students and some recent graduates. There were a couple internationals in the group as well. And we were working to plan the Conference of Youth, which is the annual meeting of the youth nonprofit constituency group to the UNFCCC. So that was it's a 3-day conference that's held to rally the youth who are going to be going into this international conference, collect our thoughts, write out our policy goals and proposals, and do some capacity building so that everyone can go into the main conference really understanding what their role is there. And so we spent 10 months organizing this with the idea that it was going to be held in Chile. And then 3 weeks ahead of time, it got moved.
Yeah, because of this
to another continent. And it was terrifying. I slept for those 3 weeks. I think that probably took like 2 or 3 years off my life, honestly. It was very stressful. But overall, at the end of it, we did manage to host about almost 500 students in Madrid, Spain, for this event. And at the culmination of it, I was literally in tears when I found out that the UN Secretary General, Antonio Guterres, came to our closing ceremony and for the first time spoke to Adequoy, to the youth constituency working on climate change, to specifically call us to action, to thank us for our leadership in the climate movement and to encourage us to keep pushing our politicians and heads of state to act on climate change now. So it was an incredible opportunity to work with so many youth from around the world in the process to help these Chilean youth who had never been involved in UN climate change work to all of a sudden be right on center in the middle of the show and in center stage of the whole process. And also to be able to bring together the voices from all around the world that were able to attend. We had participants from 80 different countries that were there in Madrid with us in November. It was an incredible opportunity.
Right. And then after that, we jumped like straight into the negotiations. And I just want to know, like, what was your impression of how everything ended, or how should well, it really didn't end, like how everything was after.
Hanging.
Yeah, exactly.
And has there been any closure since then?
So I'm gonna no, unfortunately. I'll preface this with my goal of going to COP was to empower youth through COI and then support the COI attendees and the Chilean youth in engaging at COP. I didn't have personal policy goals that I was really working on at COP. So once COI was finally over, I was finally able to sleep. So I felt like I coasted a little bit through COP. It was the easiest COP ever because the COI was so hard. Which is not necessarily the best perspective, and certainly not what you're looking for. But on a policy side, I was focusing on Action for Climate Empowerment, or ACE, which focuses on that public participation, education, and stakeholder engagement part of the climate change movement, that we need to have this public access to information and for the general public to be engaged in the decision-making process around climate change efforts in their community, local level, national, regional, and international level. In terms of a lot of what the negotiations were focused on, forests, forestry, and oceans, and especially carbon market, while I wasn't following those personally, and focusing on those, I was very disappointed that we weren't able to reach consensus on carbon markets. I understand that this is such a complex issue, and it's going to take a lot to get 208 countries to sign on to something that is going to work for everyone, that to really address the problem. But and I think we're kind of in this balance of, do we strive for perfect? Do we strive for a really ambitious goal? Because we understand that, one, we don't typically meet that goal, so we should at least try to do the best we can. And two, that, this ambitious goal is going to set the framework for the next 1 to 2 decades of climate action and possibly beyond, just like the Kyoto Protocol did, just like the Montreal Protocol did. Montreal Protocol in 1990, I can't remember exactly what year, but in the 1990s, banned chlorofluorocarbons, which were they weren't a greenhouse gas, but they were a molecule that came from refrigeration units, like your fridge and freezer, air conditioner, and went into the atmosphere, they ate into the ozone layer. So that layer that protects us from UV radiation started breaking up. And so we saw huge holes in the ozone that led to increased rates of skin cancer, including in Chile, where they had a large hole over the ozone that came up to Antarctica. So I think like 10 Chile is going to have skin cancer in their lifetime, which is really a huge impact on public health, as well as the health and well-being of the planet, because glaciers were melting from this increased UV radiation on them. Now, while the Montreal Protocol was effective in closing up the hole in the ozone, and we've seen a lot of great progress on that in the last 20, 30 years, we still haven't addressed that the alternative that was presented by, at the close of the Montreal Protocol, hydrochlorofluorocarbons, I think they are, HCFCs, now are a greenhouse gas and are impacting our atmosphere in different ways and creating the global warming effect of climate change. And so because that policy was focused on, this one goal of eliminating one issue, they didn't end up solving the greater issue of how do we protect the planet through refrigeration? How do we make sure that refrigeration is done in a sustainable way? So when we look at the current goals of, implementing the Paris Agreement and on carbon markets, we need to consider how can we find a balance between seeking this ultra high level of perfection in the policies that we pursue, or do we shoot for a lower goal that we can actually attain and that countries will be willing to sign on to, so that we can make some degree of progress. And it's a tough debate, and so I don't think we've quite solved that yet. Clearly, we haven't had the movement on the carbon market at all. In the United States, there's a group that's trying to pursue an act that will provide have carbon dividends, and so they are looking to allocate a certain amount of carbon emissions to each person, each individual, and then people who exceed their carbon emissions levels will have to pay a fee, and those who reduce their carbon emissions will get some sort of tax break. And so this is a way that is pursuing a more just transition, because it is balancing that, wealthier people tend to, if they have a second car or second home, or, footprint for their square footage or emissions, and have quite as much privilege or wealth and struggle, they're going to be able to save and get money back at the end of the year by promoting these sustained solutions.
That sounds like a lot of monitoring different things if it's by every individual.
Yeah.
And you have to monitor what electricity they use, how many miles
Yes. So
they use, what kind of car they have, how many times they go out to eat, get takeout, use stuff.
So I'm sure the implementation of something like that.
Huh?
Yeah, I wanted to ask a follow-up.
Yes. So all
Sorry.
it are great, but getting them down to the actual applications is going to be really difficult, and so that's something that is going to require continued work and progress and research and investment, which is something that I don't think like I said, the political elites, and I don't know if the political will from the people who actually get to the decision, the corporations and international organizations are going to be able to invest on that.
Well,
but one positive note, I was on development program last month, that brought on a representative from the Dutch banking system, and the Dutch bank did an audit of their investments and looking at their risk factors that they were exposed to. So just like an insurance company has to understand risk, this bank wanted to look across their entire portfolio and understand what risk their investments were vulnerable to. And they particularly were focused on nature-based risk. And they found that 30% of their portfolio was at risk of nature-based solutions collapsing. So the ecosystem functions that supported these investments were at risk because of climate change, because of habitat degradation, because of population growth or urban sprawl. And so what that looks like, particularly in Holland, when we think of Holland, we often think of the tulip fields, right? And tulips require pollination. And so if they lose their pollinator populations, the whole tulip fields are just going to dry up and they won't have flowers. Now, not only is that going to impact the tourism sector, but it's also going to affect their exports because they export a lot of those cut flowers.
Right.
So their economy is intrinsic stunts. And so by understanding nature system services as an externality, as something that's an effective business, it exposes them to incredible amounts of risk that by incorporating that into their projections and their portfolio research, they can better manage those risks and then invest in supporting nature and supporting action on climate change.
Right. Right. Well, that goes along with what I said earlier. We have to educate and show the corporations and investors how working to prevent or reduce climate emissions and take care of the environment is going to be good for their pocketbook as well. Because if they don't take care of the bees and they don't pollinate tulips, then that's going to affect their economy. Nobody's going to be buying any tulips. That's the import business, shipping business, that's the air freight business, a lot of things. And then we show them how that doing green industry, green business help them to invest in new business.
Yeah.
And so it's a vicious cycle for sure.
Yeah.
So how exactly does your
Absolutely.
work with governments and private industry, and how do you get the word out there that you exist and you have this education tool, ClimAcademy, for people to take part in, which will help spread the word?
And that's how I got involved in climate work.
Did you get any of that?
I'm sorry, you were breaking up there.
Okay. I said a
Not
lot.
quite. Now I hear you.
Now you hear me. Okay.
Sorry.
So,
Oh,
so I guess the important part was, how are you working with government, local, regional, national, and how are you working with private industry? And how are you getting the word out there to the masses that your organization exists? And how do you help those who go through your academy, after they go through the academy, to motivate and organize and actually do some projects? Again, because funding is rare, I know, these days. Not rare, but tight.
mhm.
Did you hear all that? I don't have to repeat again. Froze.
So sounds we're working with municipal
I'm gonna make my
governments
order.
with the park department because they're responsible for dealing with stormwater management. And so getting to work with them about the importance of climate solutions is something that I love. We also are working with private sector landowners, you know, huge multi-million-dollar real estate investment funds and things like that. And so to work with them and to talk to them about the importance of maintaining their natural areas and providing this natural habitat as part and parcel of the land that they're selling or leasing is such an incredible opportunity for me to reach out and engage with with private sector corporations. Now, through Care About Climate, we really focus strongly on the education for about justice, about skill development. So we really want to train people up to be leaders so that when they go out into their communities, they can address these problems head on and be really strong at going out and training the generation that they encounter, so that they're going into schools locally, that they are talking to their friends and peers and colleagues about how they can implement these climate solutions and what the urgency is of it. And so in our first course, we talked about the climate science. And so we're looking at what change, I guess, is, and just because whether, like I said, with English as a language, not exactly and what that means, but making sure that people all have this general understanding of what we're talking about first, and that they have a really strong basis in science, so that when you go to explain why carbon emissions are bad, you understand how they interact in the atmosphere and what causes climate change and how that reaction works on a chemical level. Because honestly, I didn't understand that for the first few years that I was engaged in climate change work. And so I was like, I should actually know this so that I can explain this to people who may be doubting its validity. Then in our second course, it's called Developing a Sustainable Economy. So we look at the current economic models as a linear economy and talk about what it would take to transform that to a circular economy. Talking about what the externalities are, what those things that aren't being considered in, a typical balance sheet or, an income and liability statement. Those don't count for the pollinators. They don't count for increased precipitation due to climate change. That's not factored in to their accounting. And so making sure that we, moving forward, that we do try and include those risks and liabilities and the value that nature provides to us in our accounting through triple bottom line accounting. As we go into our third course, that's where we really dive into those leadership skills, and we talk about what it means to create a mission statement and set goals that are SMART goals, which are specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, and timely. SMART goals. And that we can roadmap if we're trying to divert from we want to live it. And from there, they go into the Climate Ambassadors program, like I mentioned. And so as ambassadors, they're getting one-on-one feedback from an experienced mentor to be able to implement these projects in their community. And so they'll do a lot of background research during ClimAcademy on what their community needs really are, who are the decision makers that they need to engage with, and how to reach them. And then really driving a multifaceted communications campaign that touches on all the different stakeholders and reaches all the stakeholders who are engaged in both the decision making as well as the outcome of it. And so through Climate Ambassadors, they get this opportunity to go out into the field and implement the types of climate solutions that we've talked about for the past, 2 to 6 months in the first 3 courses.
Sounds like a great course. Sounds like you're doing well. We're working in the future and spreading the word and trying to get some of this done with you as BLI Global, of course.
Yeah. And Sarah, I want to ask.
I would want to take some.
Sorry, what did you say?
Did you hear me? I said I would love to work with BGI Global and learn about that you're doing. Share some of the work that you're doing, and also just hear from you what it's like as a published author, and what it takes, how you're communicating about climate change through literature to young children.
So Robert is going to get the.
Oh, are you gonna grab a copy? Yeah.
Yeah, but while he does that, I wanted to ask you something that I think a lot of people wonder is how can the US lead the way in climate ambition, because it appears that we're really lagging behind, especially when we compare ourselves with the EU, for example. I don't know if that's a question you can answer or political. Here is a book.
We're going to plug our book here too.
Honestly, I'm not so honestly, I'm not sure still climate change deserves to be the leader. I think we desperately need countries to step up as leaders. But I don't think this is something that the U.S. can necessarily, honestly take the lead on without huge shifts in our, our public policy, in our economic system, in, how the country operates. We're a very individualistic country, whether it's, pulling yourself up by your bootstraps or the puritanical belief system that our country was built on, or that the current, country setup was built on. But if we look back to what America used to be, and how the Native Americans and look to the guidance of indigenous communities and how they engage with the earth, I think we can learn a lot from that, and the United States can kind of share perspectives towards a more collective economic and social model. Now, on international scale, again, pretty tough for the U.S. to come out as a leader on this. But I think that by ramping up our nationally determined contributions to the Paris Agreement, we can show that we are committed to taking action on climate change. And I think we're seeing a lot more local governments, whether it's city, municipal leaders, or private corporations, who are stepping up and saying that they are recognizing the economic benefits of acting on climate change now and building a more sustainable future. We're seeing big investments like I think it's Blackstone came out earlier this year with a declaration saying that invest in fossil fuels is not in the best interest of their shareholders, and they cannot continue to invest in funds that contain fossil fuels because it is not sustainable from an economic perspective. And so, as we're seeing more companies, and not like just like with COVID, we're not high level federal, private sector, as well as from local government officials on the state and municipal levels that are really ramping up their activities to build a more sustainable future. So it's really more of in a sense, it's almost a grassroots movement that we're building in the United States to turn the tide on climate change as a country and meet the goals of the Paris Agreement, despite a lack of federal leadership on it.
I think part of the issue with that is these investments on the banks, stuff, other venues, other resources. You have to develop the solar. You have to develop the wind power. More people
all of our
going green.
technologies take time to gain, that broad, the broad level of participation that they become the default. And so, look at smartphones. 20 years ago, no one, like very few people were walking around with a cell phone at all. Maybe they had a car phone, or maybe one person in their family had a personal cell phone, like a flip phone or a Razor or something like that. And now you'd be hard pressed to find someone who doesn't have a smartphone with internet capabilities, phone calls and apps, and all these different connectivity. And so it really didn't take that long for people to hop on board with smartphones. And I think we can encourage the same trajectory for renewable energy acceptance if we commit to it with the same amount of funding and support that we have with other technologies. And a big part of that is going to be changing how our subsidies work. So the United States, just like many other countries, is still subsidizing fossil fuels, both coal and oil and natural gas. And by shifting those subsidies towards renewable energies, we can promote and really incentivize these technologies to grow while they are still more expensive. And then as they gain more support, as the demand goes up, they'll be able to reach that level in the market where they're able to lower their prices significantly because of the market share that they'll hold.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, so I wanted to talk about the book, because you asked, and so I don't know if you are referring to this book, but this is the one that is really focused I hope she can see.
Yeah. Can you see?
Yeah, I think she can see. So we wrote this book when we started when I was in Uganda with a friend, Herbert Murungi, and he runs a not-for-profit back there that is on providing renewable energy to rural. So we started the concept, and we wanted it to be based on life experience there, which there was a landslide, wiped away almost an entire town in the village there, and there was huge impact to the community. So we wanted to create awareness that this is what climate change can do, and maybe children start to learn about what is climate change, because no one is really teaching them this in schools. So hence the book got published. Yeah.
It's the first of a series. We plan on doing more about the oceans and lands and the air and carbon pricing and everything. So
yeah,
there's more to come.
frozen. You're frozen.
How about now? Am I moving?
yeah.
Okay. That's amazing that it's going to be a series. I didn't realize that there's more to come. So exciting.
Yeah, and so maybe we could do one with your organization as well, because I feel like there's not enough within young children, the young, so leave alone the youth, because youth are already educated, but then the children, here you call it there's not enough education, awareness in the schools. So that's also the reason why we did it, to just conversation and make it easy for parents to talk to their children about it. Yeah.
Yes, and I think focusing on those solutions, on the changes that we can make to create a more just and more sustainable world is really the story that we need to be telling. Care About Climate has always tried to focus on the positive, because a lot of times climate change work can feel like a lot of doom and gloom, but there's so many opportunities in climate change for us to act, for us to adapt our current systems and change the status quo. I think that's really the exciting and fascinating part that really sparks the curiosity of children and youth and adults alike.
Yeah, so thank you, Sarah, for being here with us today and really talking to us about what you do. I don't know if you have like any last words of advice to young people, activists out there who will watch this again.
I guess my last bit of advice would be just a quick, short story about how I first got involved in climate change work and environmental work. Was when I was in high school, I was biking past the lake by my house, and it smelled nasty. There were dead fish, there was a huge algae bloom, which I learned later meant that there was no dissolved oxygen in the water, so these fish were actually like suffocating because of what an unhealthy marine ecosystem they had. And so, you know, I didn't know any of the why, I just knew that it stunk. And so I went home that night and I told my dad, I'm like, the lake is so gross. Why is it like that? Why doesn't anyone do something about it? And he said, well, why don't you? I'm like, oh, me? No. I think I'm good. Like, it's not that bad. Really, I promise. And he was like, nope, every a month I'm to talk about the lake. So what did I get my but I ended up doing this. It was all white men like my parents' age, and there was no one that looked like me that was making decisions on what the lake would look like in the future of this watershed as a whole. And so I had this opportunity that thankfully they accepted my participation. They wanted me to get engaged, and they were excited for, you know, someone my age to actually care about what was going on in the community and to want to be a part of that decision-making process. Now, I can't guarantee that that's going to be the case for everyone when they try and go out and engage, but I would encourage you to go out and put yourself out there, start attending public meetings and get involved. And what that's going to look like is not showing up to protest necessarily. It doesn't mean showing up to yell at the person in power, but to show up and learn and listen, and then find a way to get involved and promote the goals and objectives that you have to create this more sustainable future that we have envisioned. So being a part of that process is, living in a democracy in the United States, we are so fortunate to have this opportunity to engage in public forums and debate and opinions on these things, and especially at local level, to be heard and stuff from. There's nothing holding you back from go out and do it as much as it scares you, and join so that you can have a voice and that your voice can be heard for all the youth.
That's a good point, because I can relate, and I can think back about hearing that older people kind of say, "Oh, those young kids, they don't care. They don't care. They don't care. See, they're not doing anything about it. They're not taking an active part, so they just care about those issues. We just have to do." So that's a good point, that they will welcome, the establishment, the people running. They will welcome your participation and your opinions, because, that's who they're supposedly protecting everything for, is to carry it on and pass it down to the younger generation. So they really want the younger generation to care, want to know they care. So that's good.
A good way to close the show.
Sure. So again, we thank you for taking your time and coming and talking about your organization and all the good that you do in your little Climate Academy program.
It's actually a big.
Well, it's a big account. Yeah, I didn't mean little, but if there's some literature that you can pass.
No, it's still a little new. Sure. So people can learn more about Care About Climate by going to careaboutclimate.org. They can look up hashtag climate sign on social media, or they can sign up for ClimAcademy by going to tinyurl.com/online youth.
Tiny
And
UR,
I can send those links to you if you
tinyurl.com.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, and we'll pass the word along.
/online.
Online.
Slash line.
Great.
So we'll spread the word as much as we can, and hopefully we can help
For having me.
the efforts of
to partner with you folks moving forward, and thank you for having this conversation so that more people can learn about if they care about climate, what they can do about it.
Yeah.
You're doing a good job, Sarah. It was a pleasure talking to you. Thanks again. Hope we have the opportunity to speak.
Thank you.
Okay.
Okay.
Have a good night. Bye bye.
Yes, I hope